Alright, so tonight we have some global updates to go over, because as we're distracted, things are still moving behind the scenes. We're going to start off with an example from New York City. Now at first, it might seem rather innocuous, but we'll have to extrapolate the situation to the future just to get an idea of where things are heading. Just remember, it's all about incremental steps, nudging the population toward the desired end goal. So, New York City is implementing body scanners powered by AI into the subway systems in what is being described as a way to lower violence. The mayor said he just wants to keep New Yorkers safe. Yeah, well, if that was the case, then maybe their DAs might try, actually prosecuting violent criminals instead of law-abiding citizens. I know, just a thought. But that's also how you know this is entirely BS. We've talked about this many times. It's the Hegelian dialectic, I suppose. Create the problem, exploit the problem, and offer the solution. Their policies allowed crime to run rampant, rising to intolerable levels, and now they're using that to incrementally move towards total surveillance. If you create a bad enough situation, the masses will actually applaud your authoritarianism. Now, I probably can't articulate just how drastic the changes to everyday life will be, but I can think of a few examples off the top of my head. Now New York City is supposed to be in the launch program for smart city implementation. They signed deals with Google, the whole nine. And I quote, "We want New York City to be a place where the latest and greatest technology can come to be utilized. They even plan to have drone surveillance of the population and robotics employed to fight crime."
Today, we are announcing 3 new policing technologies in New York City. The K5 autonomous security robot, the Spot Digidog robot, and the Star Chase GPS attachment system. Our job is to fight crime and keep people safe. And these tools are significant steps forward in that vital mission.
We are here to get stuff done. #GSP.
They plan to roll out these new technologies through 2024 and beyond. We're just in the beginning phase. Eventually, when you go renew your driver's license at the DMV, they'll switch you to a digital ID. This is the foundation for their entire control grid. It really is the linchpin to their entire system, as it directly connects the government to your everyday life, which is something that nobody should want. I mean, it does tie you to the carbon trackers, social credit score, health pass, collects public government records, medical records, connects to your private banking information, social media, even internet browsing history and location data. The new 5G towers that you've seen being installed throughout New York City, and really every major city, will be picking up the data from your ID. More than likely, it's going to be through some iteration of an RFID chip. Any crime committed within this grid will subsequently be tracked, and they will deploy technology developed by Palantir to monitor the overall surveillance network. Now, seeing as your ID is directly linked to your bank account, if you commit any minor infractions, think traffic or something similar in scale. Well, if you do, then the state government will just automatically deduct the funds from your account. It's being built in a way that elicits a metaphorical perfect circle. It's a closed system, a digital prison, and prisoners need to be monitored. And yeah, that's you in this scenario. Now just ask yourself, do you really believe that judges and DAs don't understand what they're doing? They don't realize the damage being done by releasing criminals with, 50 plus arrests immediately, and instead they target law-abiding citizens? Of course they know. It's called anarcho-tyranny. It's all a means to an end. Now I suppose if I had to guess what comes next, well, it's probably going to be facial recognition cameras. They'll be installed to cover every inch of the subway systems, and then after that, they'll move to implementation within each borough. And trust me, every nation is currently moving in this direction. For example, here's Russia's facial recognition system in the subways. And watch how they specifically target journalists and dissidents. Yeah, every tyrant's wet dream.
This video was recorded by Russian civil rights activist Alexander Zharov as he entered a metro station in Moscow. We see Zharov walking through a payment gate equipped with a camera, which snaps a photo of him. Minutes later, police officers approach him on the platform. It was the 3rd time Zharov had been detained inside the Moscow metro. The 32-year-old was identified by facial recognition, a technology that's widely deployed across the city's subway system. A Reuters investigation has found that Moscow's video surveillance network plays an important role in the arrests of anti-government protesters.
And now we have California. They're getting involved in some new surveillance measures too, and they took a page out of the 15-minute city playbook. Almost 500 new high-tech cameras are being installed along freeways, and they're using Oakland as their testing site as well, once again claiming that this is going to make the area safer. However, would you like to know what would actually make the area safe? And again, I don't know, just throwing it out there. But you might want to try applying already written laws and prosecuting shitbags. Yeah, just a thought. Anyway, through these high-tech cameras, they are bragging about being able to monitor crime in real time, again claiming we're making California safe for all. Yeah, sure. After all, if you're not a criminal, then you have nothing to hide, right? This is the perpetual argument used in favor of state mass surveillance throughout history. It's the underlying justification at the birth of every surveillance agency from the Soviet Cheka to the German Stasi and beyond. Don't commit crimes and you have nothing to worry about. Of course, this argument requires the public to overlook a simple and universal truth. That which is legal today can be made illegal tomorrow, and the people who make those decisions are often not very good people. With the ability to track and trace every behavior and movement of the citizens in real time, the temptation to abuse that technology to increase government power is exponential. That is to say, mass surveillance tends to inspire governments to abuse their authority and treat people like criminals even when they are innocent. And yes, it does. As we witnessed around the world during the pandemic lockdowns, authoritarianism can rear its ugly head without much warning and with incredible speed.
Penetrates the cabinets. So change is not just happening. The change can be shaped by us. We have to prepare for a more angry world. How to prepare? Takes the necessary action to create a fairer world. I see the need for a great reset. So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen.
There is only one way this pandemic is going to go. It's going to get worse and worse and worse.
The next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
Keeping people safe. Yeah, that's not the goal. So, do you guys remember the ULEZ cameras being deployed in the UK? The ones that the Blade Runners were removing? Yeah, these are going to be used eventually to do the same exact thing, and that is to monitor and track movement. It's all about enforcing their technocratic system, and that's what's going to happen in California. So, can you guess where this is heading? Yes, that is correct. We are following the model for the China system. So, check this out. China is even going around to people's houses and placing unique QR codes on their doors for easy monitoring. This allows anyone and everyone to check the homeowner's social credit score. All you have to do is scan the QR code. It's very simple. This is dangerous for multiple reasons, but it encourages people to treat their neighbors with a low social credit score as subhuman. In fact, even interacting with a person who happens to have a low score, well, it can lower yours. It essentially others them and locks them out of society.
Picture your life in a place where everything you do, what you buy, how you behave, is tracked. The government gives you a score, and the score is a measure of how trustworthy you are as a citizen and determines what you're allowed to do, like ever. Boarding a train, getting a mortgage, all goes back to this score. It's called social credit. It's actually happening in China. The system's eyes are in big data, artificial intelligence, and roughly 200 million surveillance cameras. She's a 752. That's her rating with Sesame credit. You start with 1,000 points, and you can print out your report anytime. You lose points for things like jaywalking, littering, tossing cigarette butts, or spreading rumors. Cameras do a lot of the surveillance work, but it's pretty analog too, like posters that list the ways you can gain or lose points. And each night, local TV shows the surveillance highlights of the day. She's an information collector, a paid enforcer who walks around and writes down deeds about her neighbors. Like the man who carried a drunk person home. Things like this are good deeds, she said. But the farmer overheard swearing and being rude? Yeah, bad deeds. Her quota is 10 a month. She likes the work. Everywhere she goes, Ouyang Haoyu is followed. What she buys, how she behaves, is tracked and scored to show how responsible and trustworthy she is. It's called the social credit system, and in one version now being tested, a person's reputation is scored on a scale of 350 to 950. And Haoyu, with a good score of 752, is okay with it. In fact, most people are.
It's a mechanism like pushes you to become a better citizen.
It's big data meets Big Brother, expanding how the government monitors, understands, and ultimately controls its 1.4 billion citizens. Thanks to advances in artificial intelligence and facial recognition, and a web of more than 200 million surveillance cameras.
Are people bothered by privacy concerns?
We think the lot of camera keep the safety is really good. We can accept it.
Companies are experimenting with the algorithms to help the government create the new national social credit system. The government also has pilot projects. In one, citizens are required to do hours of unpaid work to get benefits. And scores are docked for things like littering, a messy yard, gossip, even jaywalking. Video of offenders is shown on the local news.
But it is pretty funny to hear them claim that they actually like the social credit system, because they don't really have a choice. If they say they don't like it and it's tyrannical, well then their social credit score gets lowered, and they cannot travel or buy food. And ultimately that's the entire point. Once you get a system like this implemented, the people have no choice but to go along with it and align themselves with the tyrannical dictates. Otherwise, you can't really live your life. And if this comes to America, well, then you can keep your society without me. I'll probably end up being happier anyway. But to each their own, I guess. To each their own. Alright, moving on. So once again, while we have been distracted with the culture war, the terror attack in Moscow, the Ukraine war, the ongoing conflict with Israel and Palestine, and, whatever other crazy shit we have going on. And while that is happening, CBDCs continue to be rolled out behind the scenes. All over the world, mind you. And so, let's start with China. The digital yen is in the middle of a massive trial, covering over 25 million people. This week, they released new guidelines for tourists using CBDCs for the first time. Now, a journalist for a crypto website wrote of her experience using it, and while functionality might seem limited right now, we should note that she talks up the quote-unquote de-dollarization aspect of CBDCs. It's all about aligning digital currency with the multilateral world plan. And the multilateral world plan. That's a euphemism for global governance. However, from there, Hong Kong now has its own CBDC and are tokenizing deposits. Alright, but from there, we got some news out of the European Central Bank. They just unveiled their digital euro rulebook. And then in Sweden, they just released their final report on a CBDC pilot program and want to make it available for offline payments. The United Arab Emirates also just announced their CBDC pilot program. All of this is just from the past week. It goes on and on. The only slight holdout seems to be the United States, where CBDCs remain somewhat contentious, thanks to a lot of the conversations that you and I have. And just keeping the messaging in the forefront. And that message is, don't trust the government with this much power. It seems rather self-evident to me, but there's some people that still have not learned the lesson. So the e-dollar has stuttered along in progress compared to the rest of the world, with contradictory reports from officials emerging all the time. Now, personally, I think they're pretty confused about this whole thing. On the one hand, of course, they want the control that CBDCs offer. However, on the other hand, the entire nation and our financial viability depends on the US dollar being used as the global reserve. So yeah, de-dollarization pretty much threatens everything. They will not do this unless everyone will be forced to use their CBDC, something that they can control via the UN or some central bank, which also makes World War III an almost certainty. War for control of global investments for the next century. That's what's at stake. And a little tip, they will go to war for that. There's just a lot of interesting questions around this, and, the US role. But America, or no America, the global CBDC rollout is coming. According to the Atlantic Council's CBDC tracker, 134 countries representing 98% of global GDP are currently working on their own digital currency. And don't forget that the Atlantic Council underlies the importance of quote-unquote interoperability. Interoperability is not just an important part of the CBDC plan. According to the Atlantic Council, it's the whole point. And the reason? Well, yes, with global currency comes global governance.
What underpins a world order is always the financial system. I was very privileged. My father was an advisor to Nixon when they came off the gold standard in '71, and so I was brought up with a kind of inside view of how very important the financial structure is to absolutely everything else. And what we're seeing in the world today, I think, is we are on the brink of a dramatic change where we are about to, and I'll say this boldly, we're about to abandon the traditional system of money and accounting and introduce a new one. And the new one, the new accounting, is what we call blockchain. It means digital. It means having a almost perfect record of every single transaction that happens in the economy, which will give us far greater clarity over what's going on. It also raises huge dangers in terms of the balance of power between states and citizens. In my opinion, we're going to need a digital constitution of human rights. But what I see are superpowers introducing digital currency. The Chinese were the first. The US is on the brink, I think, of moving in the same direction. The Europeans have committed to that as well. And the question is, will that new system of digital money and digital accounting accommodate the competing needs of the citizens of all these locations so that every human being has a chance to have a better life? Because that's the only measure of whether a world order really serves.
Alright, so we have some updates on the AI apocalypse. So we have Microsoft and OpenAI, two of the most trustworthy companies, no doubt. Well, they are constructing a $100 billion supercomputer called Stargate. And I quote, "Stargate represents a monumental step with AI, heralding a future with unlimited possibilities." Yeah, unlimited possibilities to control the entire human race. Yeah. But it's an interesting name for it, isn't it? What's also pretty interesting is that they are placing data centers in space and deep in the ocean apparently. And they will of course be connected. As above, so below. Stargate. Yeah. Okay, so what else did we get from OpenAI? Well, we do have one more story. Larry Summers, the OpenAI board member, came out and said this, and I quote, "Artificial intelligence will eventually be able to do nearly every human job, from building homes to making medical diagnoses, particularly white-collar workers' cognitive labor. This could be the biggest thing that has happened in economic history since the Industrial Revolution," end of quote. And yeah, that's exactly why they call this the Fourth Industrial Revolution. To me, this is going to create a flashpoint of nihilism and a loss of meaning in life. Crazy times are ahead.
Full entities in the world, after thousands of years, during which humans were the rulers of the world, authority and power will shift away from humans to computers, and most humans will become economically useless and politically powerless. Already today, we are beginning to see the creation of a new class of humans, the useless class. Just as the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century created the new working class, the proletariat, so now the artificial intelligence revolution is beginning to create the useless class.
Okay, what's next? Well, we have an update on stakeholder capitalism, the hallmark of the Davos economic plan. It's essentially techno-fascism. It's public-private partnerships, merging the public sector, governments, with the private sector, corporations. That's corporatism. And I quote, "The US government is trying to force a COVID-19 vaccine manufacturer to hand over money. The manufacturer said in new filings that BioNTech received a notice of default from the NIH. So yes, welcome to public-private partnerships, where the government can fund their activities through colluding with giant international corporations. And if you think about it, I guess they had to come up with a plan because their tax base is being obliterated and fleeced into poverty. And on top of that, once AI and automation takes over, completely destroying the job markets and instituting universal basic income, well, where's the money going to come from? You can't tax people if they aren't working. Why yes, that's where public-private partnerships come into play. The money to fund the government is going to come from corporate profits and exploiting the population. What a plan, what a plan. Okay, once again we're moving on, this time to Australia. On March 27th, digital IDs were just approved in the Australian Senate, and more than likely, this is going to be coming to the US, as a part of the World Economic Forum-backed global technocratic gulag, complete with central bank digital currencies and social credit scores for all. And then we have Canada. I don't even know where to start with you guys, and I really do feel for the Canadian viewers. I mean, man, you guys are really being put through it. I guess the latest is the insanity revolving around the new carbon tax. But Canada updates might have to be a video all in of itself. So for now, let's move on. Now I want to take a moment to talk about the eclipse because there's something really weird happening with this. At least, I think so. I guess we'll find out tomorrow, right? But really, have you ever seen so many warnings from the government relating to an eclipse? Because I have not. They have even suggested having 2 weeks worth of food and water on hand, which is a little weird. Although, pretty good advice, you should have that. Anyway, there's a couple different angles to look at it. World leaders and their weird occult symbolism tend to plan big moves to align with celestial events. And I kind of feel like we might get some big event to happen on this day, probably related to the war, but we'll see. However, we do have some weird stuff to go over. So during the eclipse, CERN is going to launch a pivotal experiment after a 2-year hiatus. The mission is to unveil dark matter, which makes up about 28% of the universe, yet remains invisible to traditional detection methods. And through doing this, CERN scientists anticipate groundbreaking insights into the elusive dark matter. And so on top of that, we have NASA. They're going to launch 3 APEP rockets during the solar eclipse to study the Earth's upper atmosphere and how it's affected when sunlight momentarily dims over a portion of the planet. APEP, huh? There's a pretty interesting correlation here. So, purely coincidental, of course, but APEP was the ancient Egyptian spirit of evil, darkness, and destruction. As the archenemy of the sun god Ra, he was a malevolent force who could never be entirely vanquished. Every night as the sun traveled through the underworld or across the sky, his roar would fill the air, and he would finally launch his attack. So, just to get a summary of things, we have the total solar eclipse, CERN looking for dark matter, and NASA shooting rockets with quasi-symbolic ties to the Egyptian spirit of evil. Yeah, just another typical day, huh? Anyway, just something to think about. However, I do have something else for you to think about as well. A little craziness to end the video. After all, it's an election year, right? Well, recently we got reports that bird flu has jumped species. And I quote, "Bird flu has crossed the species barrier for the first time, infecting dairy cattle in multiple U.S. states. The sick cattle are showing alarming symptoms. Milk production has dipped as disease spreads from birds to cows, and now potentially from cow to cow." And on top of that, the largest egg producer in the United States halted production in Texas after bird flu was found in chickens. About 1.6 million hens were culled. And then guess what? Well, a dairy farmer became the first confirmed case of H5N1 bird flu jumping to a human. Okay, now, with that out of the way, get this. They are claiming that it mysteriously jumped species for the first time. Interesting timing, isn't it? Because in February of 2024, we got this story, and I quote, "The U.S. government is spending $1 million of taxpayer money to fund experiments on dangerous bird flu viruses in collaboration with Chinese scientists. The research involves infecting ducks and geese with different strains of the virus to make them more infectious." Yes, you heard me correctly, to make it more infectious. And then after that, they were trying to study the virus's potential to jump into mammalian hosts. So yeah, they were trying to see if it can jump hosts, and now it has. Purely coincidence, I'm sure. It's purely a coincidence that it's affecting cattle too. At the same exact time they are waging a war on meat consumption, all related to Agenda 2030 SDGs. Purely a coincidence, right? Anyway, that's all I have for you. Stay safe out there, but until next time, once again this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.